beloved love, both of those. So we're going to take a look at that as we walk through. So the Apostle John wrote this letter. He wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John pretty close to one another. And he wrote this particular letter to Gaius, who was his friend. And he's addressing a particular issue that's going on in this area of Asia Minor. We're not exactly sure where this church was, but they were having a serious problem. Okay? Diotrephes was the problem. And John opens up this letter really commending Gaius for his behavior. Gaius is doing certain things that John thinks are just excellent. And one of the things we notice, if you go back to the very beginning, it's going to start at the first verse, the elder, that's John referring to himself. It could be because of his age, but it also could be because of his title. When Paul died, John assumed leadership over many of the churches that Paul was overseeing, so he could be, acknowledging that and calling himself elder. But it refers to John, the Apostle John. And 4 times in this passage, he uses this term beloved. And Gaius was a dear, dear friend to him. The NIV says dear friend. But he uses the same term of Gaius that Jesus always used with him. You remember in John, he was referred to as the disciple Jesus loved. So he has that same kind of affection for this Gaius person. And he says, if you go down to verse 2, first thing he says is, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. Now, some people use this verse to, teach the health and wealth gospel, if you've ever heard that phrase before. But let me ask you this question. What do you think verse 2 reflects about Gaius' spiritual health? What is Paul saying about his spiritual health? I mean, John. So used to saying Paul. Paul wrote so much. What do we know about Gaius' spiritual health?
His soul is, he says his soul is prosperous, so
it's good.
He seems to be in a good place with his spirit and with his relationship with God.
Exactly. Were you going to say something, Chaka?
No, basically that he was in at a good place in his health and in his spiritual
in his spiritual walk.
Yeah, so he holds his spiritual maturity up as a standard.
Right.
Would to God that his body would be as healthy
as great as your spirit is.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I commend all of you who are running. But man, if we put that kind of energy and time and commitment into our spiritual growth, what would we be like? What would our spiritual stamina and strength and fortitude be like if we had that kind of commitment? So he's saying, in telling him, I wish that your health and everything else was as great as you are spiritually. So Gaius had something really going on in terms of his relationship with the Lord. And that continues in some of the other verses. Verse 3 says, he gave me great joy to have some brothers come and tell about your faithfulness to the truth and how you continue to walk in the truth. In all of John's epistles, in the 3 epistles, there are certain themes that recur. He talks about love a whole lot, and he talks about truth a whole lot. And I think one of the reasons why he talked about truth so much is because there were people, particularly if you go back to 1st and 2nd John, there were people who were deceivers among the people who were leading people astray. And John wanted his people, one, to be able to identify the truth from a lie. You remember that whole passage about trying the Spirit by the Spirit and all of that. It's important for believers to be able to discern truth from error. Very important, because we can be led astray. We can be led astray. Right. And so here in 3rd John, we see that area of truth coming up again. So he says, you continue to walk in truth. So it's not just that he knows the truth, but he lives what he knows. I don't know about you. I've studied a whole lot of the Bible. We probably all have studied a whole lot of the Bible. But how much of what we know do we walk out in our lives? Gaius did that. He says, you continue to walk in truth. Verse 4, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. No greater joy. I mean, think about it. You, maybe not you, but certainly John, gave his life so that people could hear the gospel. What it must be like to know that you and other apostles, disciples have been beaten, put in jail, persecuted in every way imaginable, contending for the souls of people, and then they go astray.